Meh, you mugs. Bogie and Eddie G want to let you know that Have You Ever Seen is sponsored by Sparkplug Coffee. This is a drinkable that Canadians and Americans can get delivered right to their door within a week, and Canadians will get their Sparkplug shipped for free. And what is being shipped? Why, the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans in Canada, sweetheart. And if you don't like to pour caffeine down your throat, they can offer you half-calf and full-on decaf. Sparkplug also has all manner of blends and roasts, including rotating seasonal blends. So all that's great, but what's even greater is making the choice to sign up for a membership. That'll get you perks and deals that non-members cannot take advantage of. Plus you will save money on every single order. You can customize to get stuff when it suits you, not when it suits them. Because this ain't no run-of-the-mill Coffee of the Month club. You can quit or even just pause whenever you want, especially if a hurricane is ravaging your hotel while vicious gangsters are holding you hostage inside. Okay, maybe that actually is a good time for coffee, but it's probably not a priority. So whenever you're ready, you need to type sparkplug.coffee/HYES into your browser. You'll save 20% by using our HYES promo code, and you even help us out because the Ellises see a little scratch when you tell Sparkplug that Have You Ever Seen sent you. All right, I'm warmed up now and I'm ready to jam about Key Largo. So Andrew Luther, I humbly ask you to toss your theme song into our lives so I can do some jamming. And some yang, meh, and action. Have you ever seen Key Largo? Hi, movie lovers, and thank you ever so much for opening an ear to the 512th boating trip of the Classic Movies podcast known as Have You Ever Seen? I'll be spoiling John Huston's Florida set motion picture today, and I'll be going through the plot sequentially. And the sweetheart talking to you all on his own today is the man who can take a bullet in the abdomen and barely sell it, Ryan Ellis. The old constipation, not death in this case, but wound. Bev is never here with me on these Friday shows, so it's monologue time. All right, let's get to it. Key Largo, Montego, baby, why don't we go, was released by Warner Brothers just a few months shy of 75 years ago on July 16th, 1948. And despite its name, this movie is mostly set indoors. They did shoot at least some of the exteriors in Key Largo and also Key West, but the interiors were shot in a Burbank studio. This was quite a year for John Huston and Humphrey Bogart because back in January of that year, Warner's released one of the greatest films of all time, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. That's a title that's going to come up a lot today. And since that was filmed, I think, on location in Mexico, which was very unusual for Hollywood to do back then, Jack Warner said, nah, you're not doing that for that long again, John Huston. A little exterior stuff, not that much. Rotten Tomatoes loves them some Key Largo. 97% of the critics there say hip hip hooray for the Key. There are 36 reviews on that site, and their average rating is 8.1 out of 10. The Rotten Tomatoes audiences have lapped up the Largo too. 88% of them dig it. 8-8. The film also seemed to have done quite nicely at the box office 3/4 of a century ago. A website I've been looking at lately, especially for older films like this, The Numbers, it's called, The Numbers, says it was third that year. We've covered Red River on this channel. Yahoo! Yeehaw! Woo! And The Numbers has that John Wayne Western as the number 2 hit of 1948. Apparently The Snake Pit raked in the most dollars of any 1948 flick. Key Largo won an Oscar. Claire Trevor's name was called for Best Supporting Actress. The only other nomination the film had, the only other one listed in the IMDb's awards section at least, was a Writers Guild nomination for the John Huston and Richard Brooks screenplay, and I could have seen this getting nominated for the Oscar as well, but it didn't. As far as American Film Institute recognition, Key Largo was up for the top 100 genres list in the gangster category, but failed to make that. And Edward G. Robinson as Johnny Rocco was up for the top 50 horrendous so-and-sos on the top 100 heroes and villains list, but he didn't make it either. Of course, movies of this era always opened the show with credits, and they generally didn't have end credits. That's true here, too. There was no, we just start the movie and then you get 12 minutes of credits at the end, the way it so often works now. The names are staggered in the credits in a Jaws and Goodfellas kind of way. Humphrey Bogart is first and Lauren Bacall is third, but Edward G. Robinson is in the middle and a little bit higher, the way Robert Shaw was in the Jaws billing and the way Robert De Niro was in the Goodfellas credits. A little staggered billing, so it makes it look like the bigger name, really the biggest name in the whole movie, is higher, but the real star is first. And Bogart and Robinson were pretty equal at this point. Anyway, a graphic explains the very basic facts about Key West and specifically Key Largo. I love that a seagull flies almost into a bus that's speeding down the highway right off the bat here. Filmmakers often train animals to do things like this, but I don't think they did this time. It feels like it was just a happy accident that gave the scene a little more flavor. And had that bus actually hit the bird, sorry, but I wouldn't have cared. There are plenty of annoying seagulls in the world, even if this one had been smushed. And Bogie is on the bus. Cops pull it over to say they're looking for some escaped prisoners, who are in fact Indians. Yep, it's 1948, so we have to forgive them for not calling them native or indigenous people. They probably would have called them Indians in 1999, too. So after the cops talk about those guys going home, Bogie's first line in this motion picture is, "Home being Key Largo." A relatively unnecessary piece of dialogue from the Bogues. Maybe he just wanted to be able to say a line before he got to the hotel where most of the action in this film will take place. "John, I gotta say something nice and early. It doesn't matter if the line is pointless." Because it is. At the Largo Hotel, a slurry-worded gay Dawn, so G-A-Y-E, Dawn, yells at the bartender to give Frank McCloud a drink, even though the bar is supposedly closed and a few glowery thugs back up that suggestion. In fact, they made that suggestion. Gay is played by Claire Trevor, and Bogie is, of course, Frank McCloud. Our man gets his beverage and cozies up to Gay, although she cozies right back. She thinks he's got a gambling brain and wants to know what bet he would make on a horse race. You don't get a lot of women gambling in movies, especially on the ponies. I like this touch. The thugs tell Frank that the hotel is in fact closed, not just the bar, but all Mr. McCloud wants to do is visit with James Temple, who's the Lionel Barrymore character. The first time I saw this movie, and It's a Wonderful Life, I didn't know Barrymore was actually wheelchair-bound, but he really was, not just doing it to make for a more interesting character. I looked it up earlier today and saw that was because he had bad arthritis, although he does walk in this movie very briefly, so it wasn't completely wheelchair-bound. So Frank tells Mr. Temple and his daughter-in-law, Nora, that he was in the service with James's son, George, who was, of course, Nora's husband. The Noirs is played by Lauren Bacall. One of the reasons I chose to do this movie is because it's filled with legendary actors. Just in this one scene, you've got Bogie and Bacall, plus Barrymore, and we haven't even had Edward G. share screen time with any of them yet. Old Man Temple wants Frank to stay the night so they can get acquainted. After all, Frank was his son's commanding officer, and the two soldiers were clearly very close if Frank goes all the way down to Key Largo to see the man's family. We learn here that George was killed in Italy during the war. Frank tells Nora that George did not suffer when he died. He never knew what hit him. Gay takes a sock in the kisser from Curly for daring to be drunk. Yeah, 75 years ago. Thomas Gomez plays punch-happy Curly, who tells our man that the four other guys he's with are there to do some deep-sea fishing and came all the way from Milwaukee to hit these waves. I wonder if Quentin Tarantino was paying a little tribute to this film and having Harvey Keitel be a Wisconsin native in Reservoir Dogs. It's not the most common state referred to in movies. Well, we and Mr. Orange assume Mr. White is from there because White told Orange he won a lot of money on a Brewers game. And who would bet money on the Milwaukee Brewers unless you were from Wisconsin? I poke Milwaukee in the ribs here, but actually 1992, when Reservoir Dogs came out, was a good year for the Brew Crew. They finished second to the Blue Jays in the American League East that year. It was the best record they'd had in 5 years, and would be the best record they would have for another 15. Leave Milwaukee alone, you bullying podcast host! By the way, going back a bit, that's my nutshell for this movie. So, Key Largo in a nutshell. When are they gonna go fishing? They told us they were there to go fishing. Gangsters aren't capable of lying, are they? I don't think they are. I'll look into that. Anyway, Curly is cheesed that one of the other guys brought Gay along because it was supposed to be no dames. We'll soon learn that the other guy is their boss, the gangster Johnny Rocco. I guess he's allowed to break the rules he himself set. But this beefcake named Curly suggests that Gay made a play for him, or maybe that's just what all women do. If I was a lady, I'd also be all over this beautiful man. Lauren Bacall and even Claire Trevor really stand out in this movie. None of these men are remotely attractive. If Bogart wasn't a movie star, I don't think there's any way he would have landed that sexy fish known as Lauren Bacall. Anyway, Mr. Temple wants to hear more about his son because the War Department certainly didn't tell him very much. Frank is happy to tell the Temples all he knows. This part of the film reminds me a little of First Blood. Rambo is going to the West Coast to see an old war buddy in that first movie before he gets picked up by the cops, and then the story happens. The guy died of cancer, which he got from exposure to Agent Orange. Rambo's a quiet man, and he's obviously in great emotional pain, but I bet he would have been happy to tell the dead man's wife all he could, if she was interested. Here you've got the opposite. Spill, Frank, spill! Frankie says that George was a good man that all the guys liked, and he died a hero, trying to save as many of his band of brothers as he could. He stayed awake for days to do it, too, and telling everyone about his family back in Florida is what George did to stay conscious and keep his spirits up. It's funny, actually, to see Barrymore be such a nice guy in Key Largo only 2 years after playing such a bastard in It's a Wonderful Life. The AFI put him 6th on the nasty side of their top 100 heroes and villains list for that. Bogie and Bacall aren't really doing what they were best known for either. Their other movies together had such snap and even a sense of danger, especially in their scenes together. She tended to play more of a sex pot before this, like that put your lips together and blow character she played in To Have and Have Not. The two of them are just so nice here. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just way different than what they were doing in their previous 1940s collaborations. The Bees had only been married for a few years before they made this motion picture. They met doing To Have and Have Not. Well, I think they met before To Have and Have Not, but that was their first movie together. And they fell hard for each other. They were married for nearly 12 years until he died of cancer of the esophagus in 1957. And I was reading that this man lost almost all of his body weight. He was just this tiny little guy when he died. John Huston is actually the one who gave his eulogy, so they obviously were pretty close behind the scenes in addition to making so many movies together. But as for Hump's romantic relationships, his wife Methot, Methot, accused him of having an affair with Ingrid Bergman when they were making Casablanca. But I don't know if they really did mess around or not. I'm pretty sure he did mess around with the far younger Lauren Bacall during To Have and Have Not. 4 of her first 6 movies were with Bogart. The divorce with Mayo was only 11 days old when he said, "I do," to Miss Bacall. And now we do get some Indians. Okay, even if the actors call them that throughout this picture, I won't anymore. Let's do what we do in these modern times and call them natives, or even Seminoles. I always thought that was one of the coolest sounding native tribe names. So a bunch of natives arrive on boats. There are old women and kids, plus some grown men. Old woman smokes. I think it's supposed to be a comedy scene. Jay Silverheels plays Tom Osceola. And I saw that name in the credits when I was looking up who he was and thought, where do I know that from? He was Tonto on the Lone Ranger TV series. The guy playing his brother John is Rod Redwing, also a legitimate native. I bring this up because Hollywood is so well known for casting white people as Seminoles or Mohawks or Cherokees, so it's nice to see they got people of that actual background to play these characters. John Huston was known to be a world traveler. I don't know how enlightened he was compared to our absolutist times today. He probably wasn't at all, but I could see a guy like him not being as judgy or as racist as other people were then. When you're exposed to other types of people on a regular basis because you see the world, and you can see they're generally not that different from yourself, it's easier to treat them like you would anyone else. Just to up the ante, a hurricane is coming to trap all these people in that Florida hotel together. They're battening down the hatches as it gets darker, but guns finally get pulled and we know trouble's brewing. It's more than half an hour into this movie before we finally meet Edward G. Robinson, but here's Johnny Rocco lounging in the bath with a cigar. He's up and at 'em when he hears all the yelling going on in the next room as the thugs are making sure Frank doesn't try anything. Johnny, incidentally, is based on both Al Capone and Lucky Luciano, and I think other gangsters, too. The Capone thing I can definitely see. I don't really know that much about Luciano, so I'll take their word for it. And since Eddie G was known for playing gangsters, he's right in his element here. One of his greatest characters was Rico Bandello in Little Caesar. Mother of mercy, is this the end of Rico? Harry Lewis, who plays Toots, one of the thugs, has a great comeback when Old Man Temple asks if this is a robbery. The response to that is, "Yeah, we're going to steal all your towels." I like that line a lot. I can see Richard Brooks writing that, but it really feels like a John Huston line to me. But Johnny Rocco reveals that they don't want anything except a place in which to hole up. Isn't that the plot of The Desperate Hours 2, another Bogie movie? In fact, that was one of his final films. So I guess maybe The Desperate Hours was a pseudo-remake of this flick, only the Bogues is the bad guy in that. Rocco tells Temple, "You're going to be my guest for a little while, see?" He didn't quite say it that way, which is another pretty solid line. You're going to be my guest for a little while. The cop we discover they had kidnapped ungroggies himself for a minute. More trouble brewing. Max Steiner's music certainly tells us it's a big moment. Because they've got a cop at gunpoint, I guess, Frank recognizes Johnny and goes ahead and rattles off Rocco's resume. Not even Toots knew all about his boss's accomplishments. Johnny challenges Frank about why he bothered to lay his neck on the line during the war. McLeod says, no reason. And hey, as I said before, Lionel Barrymore can walk, at least a little bit. He gets so mad at Johnny that he manages to struggle to his feet and take a swing at him, but misses and falls over. Nora pounds her little hands on Johnny's chest, and Rocco forces a kiss on her in return. I wonder if Bacall was holding back and didn't want to hurt Robinson because she barely seems to be touching him, even though she's supposed to be so furious that she can't help herself from wailing on this criminal. Well, not even the good actors hit everything out of the park, but they really should have done another take of that. It's not a convincing pummeling. Rocco gets a phone call from someone in Miami, who we'll meet later, confirming that he needs the person on the other end to get to the hotel that night, despite the storm. And get this, Robinson even says goodbye. How often do movie characters ever say goodbye before hanging up a telephone? Maybe this John Rocks guy isn't such a jerk after all. Oh, okay, yeah, he is. We just saw it when he got an old man in a wheelchair to get mad enough to try to punch him, and then kiss the man's daughter-in-law very much against her will, and he's going to be a killer, and he's been a criminal. But okay, fine. At least he said goodbye. Meantime, Deputy Clyde Sawyer explains that he recognized Johnny earlier that day. His name's Clyde. Hang on a second. Yeah, Deputy Clyde Sawyer. But Toots knocked Sawyer out before he could do anything about it. Here's another great Brooks and or Huston line, because when Sawyer says the lights went out, Toots says that he was the electrician. And here's a great idea for a menacing scene. Johnny gets a shave from his man Angel while surrounded by all these people who just want the guy to cut his throat. That's power. He might as well be saying, we've got all you people over a barrel and you can't even do anything about it when I'm vulnerable enough as to be getting shaved. Proving just how hot and humid it is there in the Keys, Eddie G gets a close-up and you can see the sweat just beading on his forehead. I'm sure it wasn't real sweat, it was in a studio, he's probably comfortable, but Johnny gets a load of Nora in the mirror while cleaning off the excess shaving cream, then menaces her, even whispering in her ear a few things that we can't hear. She spits in his face after that, but Frank comes over and calmly takes her aside to try to calm the situation down. Rocco pulls out his heater and thinks about shooting his hostess dead, but McLeod points out that Johnny would have to kill everyone if he killed anyone. No witnesses, see? And because Johnny needs some of them, he can't kill any of them. Oh yeah, Claire Trevor's in this movie, I forgot. She wakes up after being slugged by Curly and joins the party, feeling bad for Nora because she can see the widow has been crying. I don't think she even knows what just happened either. She just feels bad for a fellow lady in distress. Gay spots one of the bad guys polishing his shiny gun and grows a mite worried. Now she knows what's going on. She demands a drink, but they won't give her one. Gay is Johnny's mole. Every gangster needs a mole. Johnny gets back in Frank's face, but Bogie just plays it cool, which is something he almost always did, play it cool. Well, except for his early movies where he was a villain, wasn't always cool there, and then in The Cane Mutiny. And I guess actually in Treasure of Sierra Madre for that matter too. But my point about The Cane Mutiny, that got an Oscar nomination for him, and it was deserved at least partly because he played a paranoid, almost loser. That was not what Bogie usually did, especially once he became a star in the early 40s. Frank isn't driven by money, we find out. He just wants a world in which there's no place for Johnny Rocco. Johnny tosses Frank a gun and wants a showdown in high noon type thing, but Frank won't bite. He doesn't want to die, of course, but if anyone starts shooting, he knows they're all probably going to die. Plus, Bogie had been acting for quite a while at this point in his career. He knows a 100-minute movie can't be over when it's not actually even an hour in. But the deputy leaps to his feet and grabs the gun that Frank had tossed aside. You'd think a cop would see the situation as logically as Frank did. One bullet will result in many bullets. Johnny shoots the cop, who uselessly pulls his own trigger. JR had given Frank an unloaded gun, just like John McClane does when he meets Hans in Die Hard. Enough jokes. Yippee-ki-yay. Mr. Temple assumes Frank knew the gun was empty, not that he was afraid or anything. Frank, though, gives an un-Bogart-like speech where he says he was afraid, and he didn't want to die at the hands of a scumbag. Frank also tells the Temples that he doesn't care about ridding the world of a bad hombre, even though that's exactly what he said during that standoff a minute ago. Both Temples are mad that Frank feels this way, but think, stupids. If somebody shoots Johnny, his men will make hamburger out of everyone else. Johnny gets another phone call and says if they don't get to the hotel in 2 hours, the deal is off. Dude, the roads are probably impassable because of the storm. In fact, the lights go out because of that vicious weather outside, which gives Gay a chance to sneak a drink. And you know what? It gives Warner's a chance to save some money on lighting. Rocco still objects to the drinking. Geez, man, you've got badder fish to fry than worry whether or not your lady is sauced. He does say he can't stand a dame who's drunk, so I guess he'll make time to maintain his principles. Of course, skipping ahead a few hours in this movie, he leaves her behind anyway. Gay says it's actually Johnny who gave her first drink, but he resents that because it's not his fault she likes her booze so much. And he's right. Because he was on the run in Cuba, they hadn't even seen each other in 8 years. He claims she's nothing like she used to be. Well, darling, we all age. Actors who play drinkers often win Oscars, but actors who play singers often win them too. So a singer who drinks? Gold mine! It's more surprising by the year that Bradley Cooper didn't win for A Star Is Born. Drinker, singer. It was you, lads, wasn't that? Anyway, we learn that Gay used to sing. She rattles off a tune a cappella, vamping it up a little bit even. Moanin' Low is the name of the ditty she sings, which is all about how a man is awful, yet a woman loves him anyway. A bit on the nose, but movies made in Hollywood very often are, always will be, even the good ones. I was reading that Huston didn't let her prepare to sing the day they shot the scene because he wanted her to be taken aback by having to do it, just like the character is. And there are plenty of people who think she got the Oscar for this scene alone. Gay does not get the drink she was promised. Well, not until Frank pours one and takes it on over. Frank gets a few slaps in the face from Johnny for giving Gay that glass, but Franco still turns the other cheek, still using his head. During a quiet moment, Nora apologizes to Frank for what she said earlier about how he's a coward for not shooting Johnny when he had the chance. Of course, Frank couldn't have shot him because that gun was devoid of helpful little things called bullets, but I take her point. Nora reveals that Frank's story about George being such a leader was backwards. It was Frank who stayed awake for days to make sure his men were safe, which makes sense. Major McLeod was the one in charge, not Georgie. The storm gets worse, and the building shakes enough to knock liquor bottles off the shelf, which absolutely devastates Gay. I'm surprised she didn't bolt across the room and start pulling a Barney Gumble and just lick it off the floor. Temple tells everyone a story about how a terrible storm years ago killed a lot of people and left bodies everywhere. We're learning that Johnny isn't afraid of people. He's afraid of inclement weather. Although I can't blame him. A gun is scary, but nature can take us out whenever it damn well pleases. And pessimists like me believe it's going to do just that sometime in the near future. A tree blasts through a window just to prove that point, and everyone scurries out of the way. Huston cuts outside to show the water raging and trees bending, some toppling over. I noticed right then that we don't really go outside much in this movie. It's set in beautiful Florida, but we mostly spend our time doing the bottle episode thing on sound stages. And I already told you why. Budget. Time passes and Frank gets closer to Nora, even reaching out to stroke her hair while she seems to be sleeping, sitting at the table. This movie is juggling a lot of balls. The gangster story, the weather, the drunk and her bad guy boyfriend, the family drama with the Temples, Frank and George's past in the military, and of course there's the romance developing between Nora and Frank, who probably shouldn't be quite so eager to make a move on her when she is his buddy's widow. Although she's fine with what he's doing, and so is George's father, so I guess I shouldn't turn up my nose at how this romance is developing. The hotel owners even want Frankie M to stay with them in FLA. As nice as that is, they really should feel more alarmed that they might only have a few minutes left to live. This Rocco fella is wanted for all kinds of reasons, plus they all saw him shoot a cop in cold blood. Temple finds out that Johnny made the natives stay outside during the worst of the storm, and he gets mad at Rocco all over again because they might have died. But the bad guy doesn't care about that, instead demanding that Frank boat them all over to Cuba later that night. Frank refuses, although I noticed a twitch of glee in Humphrey Bogart's face because he loved boating in real life. Johnny threatens to get Toots to hurt Frank real bad if he keeps refusing to be their captain. The major will be their captain, you get what I'm saying. But that potential torture is put off because Monty Blue is at the door, the actor, Monty Blue. Sheriff Ben Wade here is looking for the now dead Deputy Sawyer, but everybody stays quiet and plays dumb. The sheriff knows Sawyer was in the hotel that day because he called from there earlier. The sheriff doesn't recognize Johnny the way Frank did. Considering this cop lives in Florida and the gangster has been down in this area for maybe a decade, maybe he should have an idea who this is. Anyway, Temple doubles down on the lie that he hasn't seen the deputy or the Osceolas. Old James is doing a lot of covering up here. Poor fella. He just wants to run his hotel and pair off his daughter-in-law to a man neither of them even knew a few hours ago. That's all he wants to do. Leave him alone. Sheriff Ben was just about to drive off in disgust when he finds Sawyer's dead body in a big puddle of water outside the hotel. Geez, gangsters, burying him at sea makes sense, but during a storm while the water is coming to the shore in huge waves? Think, McFly, think! It's like these guys are from Milwaukee or something. Rocco blames this on the Osceolas, which is pretty clever because that's what the cop wants to hear in the first place. The sheriff finds all the natives huddled on the dock at this point. He spots John and Tom specifically and starts firing his spoiler. We find out a little later that he killed them both because the shots were off camera. We didn't know for sure if he hit them, but he did. This is good writing in this stretch of the movie because the sheriff is furious with Temple for lying about Sawyer and the brothers, but if anybody speaks up about what's really going on, then Ben Wade is going to be killed too, probably first before even the Temples or Frank face the music. The lie is keeping him alive. He just doesn't know that yet. Johnny's guys finally arrive. Here's another hilarious name for a grown man, Ziggy. The Zigster and his expert like what they see in the counterfeit money that was in a sack all this time. So here's another layer in this movie. Not only are they criminals, but they're making fake money. They're not just stealing and killing, they're enterprisers. This is the most honorable thing Johnny maybe has ever done. While this is going on, Gay and the Temples root Frank on to make a break for it. But we know Humphrey Bogart is not going to leave all of them behind and coward his way out of this. But the deal is done and Ziggy leaves with his entourage. I suspected Johnny might shoot Ziggy once he made the fake money for real money deal, but I suppose he wants to keep on doing business with his old friend. Before leaving for the boat, Johnny even pays Mr. Temple for the damages to the hotel. I love when villains are complex like this. He's a horrible human being, yet he respects another man's property, and he doesn't kill them. Rocco stuffs some money in Gay's hand and says she's staying behind, but she begs for him to take her with them. Of course, she's a changed lady, and this is all a ruse. She managed to grab Johnny's gun while she was slobbering all over him, discreetly slipping it into Frank's hand. I thought at least Claire Trevor was going to die in this scene. And that's another reason to give an actor an Oscar, when they play a great death scene, but nope. Frank and the counterfeiters just get in a boat and leave Gay and the Temples behind, alive and mostly well. By the way, the boat is called the Santana, which I believe is Bogie's actual boat. That is at least the name of Bogie's own vessel. Maybe this isn't the actual boat, but that's the name of the one that he owned. So Gay laments that Frank didn't run away and get some help. Although how fast does she think he can run? They would see him sprinting away, even at night. He's not the Flash, man. Temple must have called in the stolen boat because the guys hear the APB on the radio that the Santana is hot property. Johnny isn't worried that they'll be found on their way to Cuba, especially at night, and he also isn't worried about Gay squealing. Edward G. Robinson is really good in this movie. I'm a little bit surprised he didn't get an Oscar nomination. I didn't love Claire Trevor's performance. It was fine, but not award-worthy, and I'd say he was flat out better than she was. Interesting factoid, John Huston's dad, Walter, won the supporting actor prize for John's other movie that year, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, of the Mother Mountain. With most of the guys below deck, Frank seized the chance to pull the gun Gay had slipped to him, the gun that Johnny somehow didn't feel being pulled out of his holster. McLeod dumps one guy overboard by gunning the boat and making a quick turn, then plugs a few of Johnny's goons with the Roscoe. I always loved that. Heater, spoiler, Roscoe, a rod, as other names for a gun. Johnny kills Angel, his own man, remember, when the big man won't go up and try to take out Frank. Since Frank does have the high ground because he's on top and Johnny has nowhere to go, Rocco does some quick thinking and decides it's best to negotiate a partnership now that everyone else is dead. McLeod doesn't say anything. Bogart doesn't say a word for quite a while on the scene, actually, so Rocco keeps changing the deal, even offering all the money to Frank if he won't kill him. Johnny then gets mad that Frank isn't saying anything. Then he's back to being nice, even throwing one of the thugs' guns out on the deck and saying he's coming out empty-handed, which of course is a lie. When Johnny shows enough of his face, Frank fires a few times and finally puts Rocco down. Our hero had taken a slug earlier, so he's holding his side and showing some signs of pain, but he turns the boat around and heads back to Key Largo, calling the authorities on the radio and telling them the situation. We do go back to the hotel. I thought maybe Bogart reversing course with the boat would be the end of the movie. But of course there are loose ends to tie up back on the island. The sheriff has returned and apologizes to Temple for what he said earlier. He also feels bad for killing the Osceolas, although it's Temple who's upset for getting them to trust him and putting them in danger in the first place. But Gay pipes up and says, rightly, that the fiend here is Johnny Rocco. Although I'd feel guilty if I was the cop or Temple myself, but she's right. He did all this. Bogie calls Bacall and she announces to Temple that Frank's all right and he's coming back to us. Bit of a subtextual thing there. Frank coming back to us, but George should have been coming back to them at some point. And since it's a movie from the 40s, not even a bullet in the side can keep a smile from the face of a man in love with a woman he just met. His buddy's widow. So the cast. Humphrey Bogart has been discussed on this channel plenty of times before, but not for a very long time. He was in those 4 AFI pictures, The Maltese Falcon, Casablanca, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and The African Queen. All but Casablanca was directed by John Huston. Bogie was named number 1 by the AFI on their top 50 stars list. I think he was a terrific actor and a bona fide movie star and belongs maybe in the top 5, but was he the greatest movie actor of all time? Should have been Brando. He was 4th, but anyway, they went with Bogart. He won his only Oscar for good but not incredible work in The African Queen, but I recommend checking out The Caine Mutiny, like I said before. Good stuff there. It was pretty pertinent during the Trump years, too, because of the paranoia, and if you've seen the movie, or if you do see the movie, you'll probably know what I'm talking about. Speaking of the top 50 stars list, Edward G. Robinson, Emmanuel Goldenberg, his real name, was 24th on the male side of that list. Bogie worked with Ed Robinson 4 other times, although this was the first time Humphrey was the leading character. They often killed each other in their movies, and it happened again here. Robinson's final movie was Soylent Green, where he, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, dies. How tragically fitting, considering he died of cancer in real life before the movie even came out in 1973. So yeah, Bogart and Robinson both died of cancer. I'm planning to tackle Little Caesar sometime this year, but I find it fascinating that the only 2 times he's come up on this channel before now are non-gangster roles. Double Indemnity, great film, he's really good in that, and he's got a role in The 10 Commandments as Dathan. Where's your Messiah now? There were surprisingly few gangsters in ancient Egypt. Well, in the, Muggsy, I'm going to grease you with this Roscoe sense. What I said there, if it wasn't understandable, was, I'm going to grease you with this Roscoe. Little known fact, after the Garden of Eden went belly up, Adam tried his hand at loan sharking and racketeering. Man's got to make a living when his landlord kicks him out of paradise. Lauren Bacall made the top 50 stars list just like Bogart and Robinson did. She was 20th on the woman's side, but she's only come up on this channel once before now. You might never remember it because I almost forgot myself that she has a small role as Jimmy Cahn's agent in Misery. But as for Key Largo, who didn't want to see Bogie and Bacall for what turned out to be the last time? They made those 4 films together in such a short period of time, and this was the last round. This is the last round. Claire Trevor won an Oscar for this, we know, but was up for supporting actress once before this and once after it. Neither of those were for her role in Stagecoach, a classic we covered a very long time ago. That was our 20th ever podcast. Lionel Barrymore was only a year and a half removed from playing Mr. Potter in It's Wonderful Life. He worked with Frank Capra and Jimmy Stewart another time before Wonderful Life, the Best Picture winning You Can't Take It With You. And of course, he was also in the Best Picture champion of 1932 as well, a film we discussed just last year during Oscar month, Grand Hotel. John Huston is on my personal short list of the greatest film directors, especially from the old days. So there's a lot of guys I love now and probably would think of them first, but of the old dudes, Huston, Wilder, I can name a lot of people, but some of them are a little overrated, although we've covered a lot of Hitchcock, so I guess I got to include him in this list as well. Of the old-timers, Wells, of course, was great, but only made a few really, truly great films. Anyway, Huston's on that list for sure. His debut behind the bullhorn was The Maltese Falcon. Then he, of course, went on to do Treasure and African Queen. And he was also that awesomely awful villain, Noah Cross, in Chinatown. Huston proved, as he had in many other pictures before that he was a terrific actor in addition to being a phenomenal director. And I think all 4 of those movies, by the way, Maltese Falcon, Treasure, Sierra Madre, Casablanca, African Queen, were all really highly ranked on that first AFI list. Probably pound for pound the most successful person on that list. So John Huston was 74 when the 80s began, and I find it fascinating that his last 5 movies, all in that decade, as a man who was 10 years past retirement age, were so different. He made a World War II soccer movie, Victory, that was with Stallone and Michael Caine, and Pele, an adaptation of the stage musical Annie, another World War II set film and character study, Under the Volcano, then the excellent gangster flick, which was also a sly black comedy, Prizzi's Honor, Charlie Patana. And he wrapped it up by directing his daughter Angelica in The Dead. He directed her in Prizzi's Honor too, and she won an Oscar for that. Her dad was nominated for 14 Oscars and won 2 for writing and directing The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. That movie really should have won Best Picture too, but Larry Olivier's Hamlet took home that trophy. I have nothing against Hamlet, but Treasure is one of my favorite movies, and I think it got robbed. Johnny H. often wrote what he directed. 8 of those 14 Oscar nominations were for writing. If I didn't mention before, he and Richard Brooks based the script on Maxwell Anderson's play. Brooks went on to become a director himself, and quite a good one. He won his own Oscar for putting pen to paper for Elmer Gantry. We've covered 3 films Brooks both wrote and directed: Blackboard Jungle, Cat in a Hot Tin Roof, and In Cold Blood. And like I said about Huston and his resume a minute ago, those are pretty diverse and different kinds of films, aren't they? Max Steiner wrote the music. He was perhaps the Beethoven of film composing, with credits on King Kong, Gone with the Wind, Casablanca, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, White Heat, and many other classics we haven't previously covered, although all those I just hollered about are way back in our archives, and all but White Heat were on the original AFI list, so we're talking about 2013. Not even 2014, it was all 2013, those movies. Kong, Gone, Casa, Treasure. White Heat we covered a couple years later. So as for Key Largo overall, I'm a fan. It's taut, it's well written, it's got quite a few snappy one-liners, and the actors are generally pretty good. It's odd to see Bogart play somebody's hostage, though. Usually he was the one kidnapping people, or if he was in danger, he still seemed like he was in charge. Here he's more along for the ride. Lauren Bacall doesn't get to do that much, but Barrymore and Robinson do. I think I like those 2 guys best of this entire cast, especially Eddie G. And Claire Trevor is at least solid, just not award-worthy. So yeah, I think I made a wise choice in covering Key Largo today, and I hope you enjoyed hearing about it. In 3 days, I'll be back at it with another solo review. It's Victoria Day up here in Canada, so Bev wanted a week off to regroup. She's had a busy spring. What I'll be monologuing about on May 22nd is a movie I recommended during one of our YouTube videos back in February. Now I'll take my own advice and give Martin Ritt's Sounder a try. So that's what you'll be hearing about on Monday. Paul Winfield and Cicely Tyson, both Oscar nominated, in Sounder. I just mentioned YouTube. Well, this episode will go up sometime on Friday. It'll just be this exact same podcast with our graphic as a video accompaniment. We're trying to branch out and find more of an audience. Shee. And if you're wondering why it's exactly what you get on your podcast app, well, not everybody listens to podcasts that way. I've had trouble with my phone lately playing podcasts properly, so I'm tempted to find somebody's podcast on YouTube and listen to it that way, even if there's nothing to see. We haven't done it in a while, but Bev and I have sat down to record 8 or 10 minutes of on-camera footage before some of the episodes. Maybe we'll get back to that in the summer, I hope so, especially when I have more time after my other podcast, Scoring at the Movies, is put to rest in early June. We're going to put it out of its misery. Going to pull it a Roscoe and kill it. Our channel on the tube, by the way, is at HYES Ellis, one whole thing. So the @ symbol, HYES, and our last name Ellis. All of our podcasts are free for you through whatever podcast app you might use. That's 511 previous times we've said action, and you already know just how often Huston and Bogart have come up before. I'd recommend giving our Maltese Falcon show a chance in particular. I think we did a pretty excellent job on that one in those early days when we were known as the Top 100 Project. To say things to us, you can tweet on the twits. I'm at MovieFiend51. Bev, by the way, is at BevEllisEllis. Our email address is haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. Please like and subscribe and share and favorite if you go on YouTube or this. Write a comment on Apple Podcasts or what have you about this show. Tell us what you think, good or bad. And don't forget about Sparkplug Coffee. Their website is sparkplug.coffee/HYES. Using that HYES promo code will save you 20% off your next order. Thanks so much for spending a little bit of your day with me. See you on Monday when it's me talking alone about Sounder. This weekend, I think I'll go boating. With a bullet in my side, barely even selling that I've been shot. Sweetheart. And cut.